Hello, folks. ZiggyD here. Welcome back, Exiles. We are joined by RaizQT and Nugiyen to chat to developers Rory and Jonathan from Transfigured Gems today. Thanks for joining us once again, folks.
No problem.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of interesting questions today, and we're going to jump straight into them, if that's all right with you fine folks.
Sure.
Do you plan to change the high-end power level in PoE2? Will you still be able to one-shot entire maps and Ubers, or do you want to scale everything back? GGG has been quite vague in answering this in the past, leaving many players confused about the direction of PoE2's gameplay compared to PoE1.
I mean, yeah, we never designed the PoE1 Uber bosses to be one shot. That's not part of the core philosophy. Is how does this fight feel when it ends in half a second? But
Yeah, of course.
yeah, there's definitely when we are looking towards all these bosses, even the campaign bosses, it's making sure that the challenge is intense for where you're planned to be and what your power level is and so on. And that does mean for many boss fights, when they're really epic, they're gonna last, and the boss is gonna push everything it can at you to try and take you on, and it's a challenge to beat it. And it's natural for characters' power to grow, especially as they outgrow the content. So we can expect, because we give the players huge numbers of tools, they will find ways to use and abuse them to do crazy things. That's just part of the game, and as players raise the bar, we'll raise the bar for challenge as well.
I think people underestimate the degree to which people learning the game has changed the ability for people to be good at the game. Like when PoE2 comes out, there might be ways that are in there to be able to do that stuff that we don't know about. But that's just by the nature of the fact that we tend to be very kind of we give people a lot of tools, right? We give them also, and they're able to combine them in interesting ways. But what I expect to happen is that at the start, people won't be able to do that level of power just because they haven't worked out the builds yet, if you know what I mean. And as that stuff is worked out over time, that stuff will then come. It's sort of interesting. I've actually had a conversation with Mark quite a few times recently about why it felt like a few years ago this sort of exponentialness of PoE kind of exploded a bit, and we kind of had a lot of discussions about why is that the case, what sort of happened. And it's kind of a combination of different factors, I think, that happened, which I guess is a bit of a non-answer. But some of it really is just people learning to understand, optimizing, understanding how all of that stuff works to a degree that they can now do the kind of things that they can do, as well as us just adding stuff. It isn't entirely just power creep on our end; it's power creep on the players learning the game better too. So yeah, I suspect that things will get a bit of a reset just from the fact that all the mechanics are so different, all the skills and all that things work so differently. Or maybe someone will find something totally broken in the first day. I don't know, but my hope is that it will take a little while before the really interesting strategies kind of come together.
I feel like recent innovations in Path of Building alone have made my builds 50% stronger.
It's very possible. It's very possible, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the other interesting thing is how fast in PoE2 do those kinds of tools become as good. I mean, I imagine it will be faster, right? Just because the underlying stuff is there. Yeah, sure, to some extent. Although there's mechanically a lot of things are changing under the hood, right? Just base things that you've been able to rely on a lot. In terms of just the base equations for how defenses work and things like that change a bit, and then that has large knock-on effects to the game. So people will have to work out what the repercussions of all that is again, I think. But I mean, at the same time, I imagine the tools will be made quite quickly. I think one of the other things I've seen on Reddit and so on as well recently is the concern about does this mean I'm going to have to be using Magic Find gear and stuff like that? And I guess I did want to talk about that as well, because that is something that people have been worried about, I guess. And I actually had another conversation with Chris about this because I needed to kind of refresh my memory of so I literally said to Chris, Chris, I want you to pitch me from scratch again on why Magic Find gear is good. Because I need I need a refresher course on this again. And it really comes down to you need your game to have some axis of scaling that isn't just DPS. Having some other element, it just means that there's another factor to consider in your character build. And I guess that that's a thing that we do believe in, that it is important, which isn't to say but it needs to be competitive, right? It cannot be the case that Magic Find should outcompete damage. Like there needs to be some balance there. But it's another thing to optimize for. At the point when you have gotten your DPS to the point where you can take down anything, having the ability to, okay, now I want to be able to do that at the same time as also having MF gear is like something that can add to that. So I think that's kind of the reason why it is important. If you don't have that, then it's similar to the balance between damage and defenses, right? Like it's just there's like a kind of triangle of factors you have to consider in your build. So it's just something to consider.
Why do you think
that's kind of the thing?
Why do you think Magic Find gear is unpopular amongst like at least a vocal minority in the community then?
I guess, that's an interesting question. I think it's a little bit to do with, go on.
I think part of the reason is that the way it scales at the moment in PoE1 is quite exponential. So a lot of Magic Find gear is a lot better than a little bit and a lot of damage. So the scaling we definitely want to make sure that doing low tier content with very high rarity gear is not better than doing high tier content with a bit of rarity gear.
Right. Yes, that is a very important factor. Actually, yes, that's important. Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yep.
Do you have anything in mind how to do that?
Honestly, so this particular area, like we will have to go and revisit those equations and do stuff, but I have to say it's not something we've like yet done the balance for.
Right.
I actually then also because there are all sorts of things deep in the dark recesses of the like drop code that like that exist that all have to be looked at again. Like the equation for the way that Magic Find gear has diminishing returns is like weird and nobody understands it. And like there's stuff going on there that I kind of need to really go back and dive into and have another look at. And I'm sure Rishi will there'll be long conversations with Rishi about exactly all the stuff that needs to happen here. But I need to actually honestly re-understand some of the reasons why some of that stuff exists in the first place again myself to really get it. But yeah, Rory is completely correct that the main thing that has to be the case is it can't be better to do lower tier content with MF gear than it is to do higher tier content without it. That is I think a very good guiding philosophy to make sure that it's right. Yeah.
That moment is kind of why I love these Q&As. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It also feels like it cheapens a little bit of the rest of the game, right? If you have all these cool bosses and you designed all this great end game, and a month ago people started MFing in like tier 7 maps, and you would think that they would use all that currency to move on.
I absolutely do not like that. That is a mistake in how that was. That shouldn't be like that. So yeah, you're correct about that.
So my next question, then changing topics a little bit, is about that weapon and passive tree swapping system that was previewed. So you get the ability to bind certain skills to certain weapons, and then even different passive trees to different weapons. Mm-hmm. What happens then if you do something like, say, you ignite an enemy with a tree and a weapon that's built for big ignite damage, and then you swap over to something that doesn't have that? Is the damage that you have scaled dynamically? Do you stop dealing that damage? So on, things like that?
So the only thing that doesn't snapshot, the thing that updates is your permanent effects. So if you swap, your auras will change effect. You can't turn on an aura in an aura spec and switch to a non-aura spec.
Right.
Same for minions. You can't turn on your permanent minions in one spec and then expect them to be as powerful as then your second set, which is just about having maximum spirit.
Which I believe I might have incorrectly understood in previously. I'm not 100% sure I got that exactly right. Because like in general, when you've got two weapon sets, you have two versions of the skill. But but for permanent effects, like things that are considered permanent, like minions, it does update when you change spec. But it's not only for permanent minions. Like a temporary minion will not change because a temporary minion, being temporary means that you. So there's like a little tricky detail here, but effectively, while you have a weapon swap, you have two versions of every skill on your character, and when like both of them exist at the same time, so they sort of independently can have their own balance. And like if you fire a fireball and then change over to another one, like that fireball still is the fireball you cast from your other weapon set, so it gets all the bonuses that other weapon set conveyed.
Yeah, so if you have your totem bound to your first weapon set and you place that totem down, then switch to your second weapon set, it's still using the first weapon set's totem with all of its stats and benefits and things like that.
Cool.
So there is a lot of you can have a curse set up as your second spec if you've got the right sort of passive layout to make the alt passives fit with it. So you can have big curses in one set and then take the time to weapon swap and then start doing your thing.
So we're getting the full power of both basically, and so I could do a big ignite on an enemy and then swap to a second setup that has an extra curse and then curse the enemy to scale that.
Correct.
Cool.
So there's also a big focus on making sure that, like, if you decide that you want cold in one and fire in the other, the rewards should be significant for that to go along with the fact that you could have had a curse as your second set.
Right. Like, yes, you have, like, it's actually a different type of balance that we had to do before, because like, there's a thing where we, like, as Rory was just saying, we have to make sure that, like, now we have to consider, like, what could your other weapon set be, and make sure that the other that those are, like, balanced with respect to each other, because, like, we wouldn't want it to be the case that, like, everyone just has an alternate like weapon set with curses, because, you know, like, it has to be that there's something like there's competitive options no matter what it is you choose to have as your alternate, even though they can be quite a different build.
Yeah, same goes for weapons. Like, if you're about applying stuns with maces in one set, then using swapping to your weapon set for your second thing needs to be able to take advantage of those stuns in a significant way to make it rewarding to be using two different weapon types rather than just having two different, slightly different flavored maces.
For sure.
Oh, that's way better than I expected. That's really awesome to hear. Sick.
Sounds like a balancing nightmare, though.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. So then that's pretty much our life at this point. So, you know, like,
Nice.
we would just, why not make it, you know, 3 or 4 times harder to balance with every decision? Just whatever, you know, we'll just do it.
Why not, right?
And you talk more about spirit and why you're moving away from mana reservation. Can you reserve HP with it?
Really, the reason to move to Spirit is so that mana can matter more. It's about making mana costs a thing that more builds can care about, and less of a afterthought or something that we balance around being something you can ignore.
Yeah, I mean, the original conversation literally was, what are we going to do to make mana actually matter? And then it's like, well, what's the big problem with mana? Oh, it's the reservation system.
Specifically, when you're talking about reserving life, we're probably going to have a support gem that lowers the spirit cost of something slightly, but makes it reserve some life as well. So you've got that sort of things you can do with it. And we're going to have to come up with a bunch of cool supports that let you interact with spirit costs and spirit mechanics in ways that feel impactful.
There's something technically preventing reservation being a thing. We just have to be really like, of life and mana, that is, but we just have to be really careful that we don't accidentally make it again so that the most useful thing to do is that again, if you know what I mean. Like, we want to make sure that you never get back into a position where everyone is reserving all their resources. Like, it has to be that, like, that is not the default thing. Like, that is a niche thing to do, because the normal thing to do is use your spirit bar. So that's just important. But there's nothing, like, we may revisit things. I mean, like, you can, the mechanic is there for use on things like uniques or maybe support gems in some cases, or just certain other things. We just need to be careful with it.
You've been nerfing flasks and other things to that basically. Actually, let me just read the question. After the nerfs, the flask and the rebalance to armor evasion, the removal of dodge, multiple block nerfs, it seems that at an early stage, nowadays you demand either the use of determination or grace, either determination or grace or both, and you kind of have to have a very high health pool or a spell suppression to not just get flat out one shot, which leaves the players in kind of an awkward situation where you either have these things or you just get run over quite fast when you're near sort of the endgame yellow-red maps. Are we going to see a similar thing in PoE2?
Right. So I don't want to comment on the PoE1 balance particularly, because it is not my expertise. Like, if Mark was here, he'd have a whole rant about that. However, what I will talk about is philosophy of a few things in PoE2 with regard to this. So number one is, it is not the case in PoE2 that I would want every character to be running auras, right? Like, that should not be the case. And another thing actually around this is that in PoE2, we're getting a little bit more strict again with the fact that gear is supposed to be adding flat things, and the tree is supposed to be more multiplicative, and something like an aura also should be more multiplicative in general as well, I would hope, although we do need to discuss the specifics of those particular auras, which means that like something like determination and grace should not just be your one-stop shop to solve your defense problems. Like, it should be that the items should matter a lot, and then you multiply what your items are doing with other sources, ideally.
Yeah, there's almost no way to get armor or evasion flat values outside of your gear pieces. You're not. There's almost nothing that you can just take to be like, I can't afford the gear. I'm using this unique, so I'll use just a random aura or any mechanic really outside of gear.
But in general, your tree should be multiplicative. There was actually, you know, I had a whole rant about this that I gave to the whole company at some point in recent times. I'm just trying to remember the specifics of now. But we were talking about there was kind of a concept that we discovered about like flat things are like I had a better word for this, but a sort of despecializing in a way, because when you add a flat thing to something, like everyone gets closer to being the same when you add flat values on something, and multiplicative things are specializing because they they mean that everyone, like the person who is already better gets even better than that. So we have to decide, like, from what sources do we want things to be specializing and from what sources do we want things to be despecializing. And the tree should be a specializing like thing. It should, like, because the whole idea with the tree is that you're picking the things that are going to synergize well with what you're doing, right? Like, it's supposed to be an amplifying force to specialize your character in a certain way. Whereas the items on your character can be despecializing. Like, you can use items to overcome issues that you have otherwise, but also you're just picking what you're like. But like, in both cases, you're picking like what you want to do with your build, but it's like you actually want them to have different roles to make them feel like different things. And then the question becomes, support gems, should they be a specializing or despecializing element of your build? And we came to the understanding that they should actually be something that is despecializing, I believe, is where we actually ended up, because it's like the idea is that, like, you can use a support gem to overcome like to change what a skill, like if we want a support gem to change what a skill does, if they were a specializing thing, it would mean that, okay, you like that would actually mean that you want to use a support gem, the same support gem with a given skill all the time, right? Because basically it would just be for a given support gem that this thing is best with that skill. So therefore, like, there's no real decisions at that point. It's just like, oh, I'm using this fireball. The best thing that goes with the fireball is this thing here because it has the most effect on it. Whereas if they're despecializing, they actually mean that you actually have choices there. So that was a non-obvious answer for that one. It's actually opposite of what you might initially think when you first see it. But this was a new way of thinking actually about things that I think that we sort of had, like, on some level we understood this intuitively, especially with the tree and the way that items were, but it was not an explicit understanding that we had until we actually sort of broke it down a little bit there. And so that understanding kind of came to sort of guide the philosophy there. And this seems like it's getting way off the topic that we originally had here, but it does sort of matter a little bit, because when you're looking at a skill, a skill should be I think should be more of a specializing thing, which is why something like an aura then would imply that it should be multiplicative rather than flat. So that's like a whole long-winded answer about about how we get there. But what that means is, yes, grace determination should probably be multiplicative. Like, I'm interested to know whether or not you think that sort of logic there holds up over time. But yeah, that's the that's the whole thing.
This does mean something like the ignite support should be about making a skill that is bad at igniting better at igniting, rather than just further capping your ignite chance.
Exactly, because it's a way to use a skill in a new way you weren't using it before.
Right.
Whereas the tree is like, I'm specializing ignite with what I'm doing. I need to multiply the value of my ignites.
I say the same for spirit reservations, where they are multiplying something. You've already focused on shocks, so using Herald of Thunder on your weapon will further take advantage of those shocks.
Right. Correct.
Would you want there to be an easier way to then specialize either into, say, let's say, on this playthrough I want to be evasion stacking, on this one I want to be block or armor, like, where it's, because right now it seems very difficult to go, at least from an early stage, to say I want to just go block, unless you're like Necromancer that has like a cheap way of getting there. It very much is, you have your armor evasion, or would you rather have like certain classes would specialize, or should there be a broader range that you can choose from the start?
The block is one of those. I mean, because the idea with block is like that is a multiplicative defense that you get if you're willing to give up damage by sacrificing one of your hands. So the reason why block is kind of independent of those is because, yeah, it's intended to be multiplicative with whatever else you're doing, so that can always be the decision of, am I using my right, left, well, I guess whatever hand for defense, or am I using it for more offense? So that's kind of like where that ends up. So I don't know that I don't think block is early game should be your primary defense, because it is
right.
the multiplicative thing on top of whatever your primary defense is. Yeah.
And it is a very strength-focused mechanic, even more so in PoE2.
Yeah, I guess it sort of is. I mean, like in all cases, whatever is on your offhand is going to be being more defensive.
Right.
Well, no, I shouldn't say that. What I should say is, in all cases, you can choose to use your offhand as defense or offense, right? So whatever class you are, there's options in your offhand that are going to cause that to be the case. So block is one of those, but they have to be multiplicative with what you're doing in order to make that choice meaningful.
How does energy shield factor into this? Because you've removed life from the tree, but energy shield is a defense, but it kind of acts more like life than the other defenses.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Where are we at with that one, Rory?
It's definitely a thing of like how you recover energy shield is a significantly more controlled thing where you're not expecting passive energy shield regen all the time. It's not like life where you can just expect to get constant amounts of it back. It's a barrier and a buffer that is not reliable 100% of the time without serious shenanigans on your character. But there's always serious shenanigans available.
But do we have flat energy shield on the tree?
No.
No, I didn't think so. Yes, I thought it was multiplicative, which it should be under that philosophy.
Yeah.
Yes, we don't have flat, so yeah.
Initially, for those who can remember, you introduced the orb that was called the Eternal Orb, and then you removed it. And now you reintroduced Hinakora's Lock, which is essentially like the same thing. So I was thinking, are there anything that you kind of regret with the PoE crafting system, or that you want changed in PoE2, and why?
With the exception of Harvest. Sorry.
Yeah,
So
let's
I
not
guess,
talk.
like-
I'm
Are you
mainly
gonna
talking
include it?
about like
I get-
currency drops that you use to craft with.
Well,
And, like, the philosophy behind that.
There's a couple of things we could talk about here, because one of the big ones, which we've already talked about how we're changing, is Chaos Orb, and I think and Scouring. So like, it's sort of amazing the degree to which those two items affected the way the game is, and honestly, the way the drops on the ground are, and all of that stuff like that. Like it took a long time for us to understand the fact that when an item can change completely in one currency item, it results in the only thing mattering about an item on the ground being the base type. And that's bad. And so that is like a very important, very important thing. So I absolutely regret how that was, but I don't think that there's a way we could have even understood that where we were back when we designed that originally. So it's kind of like, it's hard to say that I regret it exactly, because that would imply like, oh, I just kind of screwed up and didn't have foresight. Like it really is, like it took a lot of, I guess, like design maturity to get to the point of understanding that. Yeah, I mean, like, when I look at something like Eternal, I don't think I regret Eternal at all either. I mean, I'm trying to think back to why it is we even removed it in the first place. Like, do you remember? It's like,
I think it was just another way of people getting perfect items more reliably, and we're
Yeah.
like, there's already a lot of ways to
but like, I mean,
edge towards that.
Hinakora's Lock is already like does bring that back, right? I mean, but the UXs of Hinakora's
It
Lock
does.
is better. But I mean, it's like, I don't know. I'd have to go back into the archives and work out what exactly was going through our heads at the time. But like, I mean, sure, like there's those, right? Those base ones matter a lot. And then when you look at like, you know, all the other crafting systems in PoE, I mean, on an individual basis, there are individual mistakes, sure, like where things like were too powerful or whatever. But I don't know that they quite have the same level of like importance that something like Chaos Orb and Scouring have in terms of affecting the whole game and the way the whole drops. So, like, I don't think that like anything that we've done in any of those other crafting systems really quite broke the drop system to the extent that those orbs did.
I do think we're now much more careful not to make sure that a League's currency or League special reward is not strictly better than a Chaos Orb. Like, in every case, you would rather use this than a Chaos Orb to do
Right.
what Chaos Orb was intended to do.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
at least not without some severe restrictions
Right.
to it.
So you're saying you want to keep like the base currencies more relevant and the others to be more of a alternative rather than a replacement?
I don't know that that's the motivation. It really comes
Okay.
down to not breaking the drop system. That's like the key
Okay.
thing. And yes, it's nice if that is a nice thing to make sure of as well, because it's a nice secondary goal. But it really is just don't break the drops, right? Like make make it still fun to find items is like really, really important. So yeah, I think that's kind of really the key element.
And do you intend items to become 100% perfect again in PoE2?
I mean, that should be hard, of course, but it will be able to happen. I mean, yeah, like at some level, like what's the point of the ability for something to exist if it never exists? Like it should just be very rare and hard, right? You know, like I don't
Sure,
think,
but you
I
could
do not
intend for something to be, say, like you get to the 99 percentile, but you're never really reaching like the perfect, like where
I see what you
everything
mean.
locks
Sure, I mean, you
into
always
the.
want something to strive for, I guess, is the thing there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's honestly like
I mean, it'll be mathematically near impossible.
yes, it's mathematically
But it'll
near impossible at some
happen.
point, but it'll
Right.
happen eventually. But you know, like the
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
But certainly, when you want there to be stuff to strive for, right? You absolutely want that. And I
Yeah.
mean, like there should be rares that you can strive for. You know, like like the most amazing rare should be a thing that is hard to get. So you know, yeah, like there's stuff like that. The other thing as well. Well, no, actually, you know, I'm not going to go into that because that's more other stuff that I probably shouldn't talk about yet. But yeah,
It is also going to be that, like, if you have an item that's 95% of the way there, it should be that you keep working on that item rather than like, actually, let's just start from scratch because I've got a higher chance to like bring it from a base
Okay.
type back up to that point.
that can be dependent a little bit, I think, on the situation. That's more iffy of a philosophy, I think. But yeah, there's going to be a lot more to talk about items later for sure.
I haven't really felt like I've heard much about Transfigured Gems and Vile skills in Path of Exile 2. Are they like alternate types of skills like that going to be a thing?
I mean, it's absolutely been a thing during skill development that be like, oh, what if it did this completely different thing? And we're like, yeah, we're going to need to make a Transfigured Gem for that at some point.
So we'll need to work out exactly what the system for gaining them is and all that sort of stuff like that. But but actually, Vile skills and in particular work way better in a PoE2 skill context than they did in PoE1 because they would just be different gems. They wouldn't be they wouldn't be so actually probably the Vile thing would probably be more like how Transfigured Gems are, where it's like there's a way to turn a gem into a Vile skill, and then presumably because it can be a 6-link now, it actually makes more, and because you've got more skill slots that can be 6 links in particular, at like the idea of a skill I use occasionally and have to charge up is way more relevant in PoE2 than it would be in PoE1. So like, I mean, we'll have to look at the exact stuff around that, but I think that the system overall, like the idea of that stuff, works way better now than it would have in the past.
I always feel like Vile skills have been a little bit underexplored, perhaps, and it does seem like there's a lot of room there in PoE2.
Agree, and I think it's hard just due to the nature of the way that that the PoE1 skill system is, and I think it can be a lot better in PoE2 for sure.
On Transfigured Gems, do you feel like it was a success? From my perspective, it's like the greatest change ever to PoE. I know that it probably took quite a lot of effort, but are you guys happy with the outcome and how the players received it?
Also a fan.
It is a success, and I think that it's nice to have a venue to just like, what if a skill just did some totally random other thing to explore? Like it's sort of easier to like explore a different balance option and a transfigured version of a gem than it is to modify the original gem. And that's kind of a nice element that we can just kind of do now. Like, and I think that just makes it easier. Like, just sort of uncuffs you a little bit with regard to like being able to just design some different things. So I think that is very good. And we're gonna continue to make more transfigured gems for each expansion. Like just make a bunch of them and throw them in there. I mean, like they're relatively easy to develop, so like there's really no reason not to like throw stuff like that in. So you know, I think we'll do more of them for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely trickier in PoE2 where each of the skills are far more like handcrafted and all their stuff going on, but they're too cool not to do.
No, we'll definitely be doing some stuff like that.
Interesting, like PoE2's combat is much more like combo oriented, right?
Mhm.
So that is
Sure.
is that why?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is why.
It's I mean, definitely plenty of opportunities of like this has just changed the skills element, and that changes a lot about it because of all the factors involved in each skill. Cool.
I feel like it takes the reins off you guys a little bit too, because if a transfigured gem is a dud, no one really cares. But if like a core skill is a dud, everybody cares. Like, it's disappointing.
I mean, the like Mark was just saying, he's like, oh yeah, I'll just be ruthless. We'll just like cut 10 of them if we don't like what they're doing. Put 20 more in, like this kind of thing. Like it's just that just like whatever you can just go ham with it. So yeah, that's all good.
Will people still be able to play one button builds? Because that's been happening a lot. It seems like everything's combining, but people are pretty concerned about will that still be a possibility?
I can't see a way that it would end up being more efficient than using your skills in a
Right.
clever way.
Okay.
But laziness does
I
increase
am
efficiency.
sure there will be ways to do that, but I wouldn't say it's a goal of ours to preserve. But also, I'm like, hey, all of these like automation gems are cool. We should have a bunch more of those and things like that. And so like it kind of ends up just being that like the nature of the tools we give players will just kind of mean that will probably be possible. But I should hope it isn't more efficient than actually like doing more than that.
And yeah, we've got cast on dodge roll. You can dodge a roll around triggering your spells to do stuff, but you could be using that spirit for something else. You could be using more other
I remember there was
Wait, that's a real thing? You're not joking?
Oh yeah, it was brought.
Yes.
Someone
Yeah,
brought
we're
it up
doing
at
custom dodge roll.
ExileCon, and we were just like, oh yeah, let's implement it.
Yeah, custom dodge roll the thing. But I remember there was a conversation between Mark and one of the other designers. I don't remember which one it was now, where they were like, "Oh, I just want to be able to have a one button build," and we were kind of like, "Okay," so like, and he's like, they were like, "Oh, I just want to use this skill," like they were saying, and we're like, "Okay, but what if you just but then you could get a bit more damage if you did this," and they were like, "Oh, well, I guess I could use that as well." Like, yeah, sure, I'll add that. So it'll be this, but then I'll just use this occasionally. And then I'm like, "Oh yeah, but then you could use this skill that would like combo this and like would increase your damage again." Like, "Oh yeah, okay, so you're right. I should add this one as well." And and pretty soon we had like 5 or 6 skills they were using, and it's like they talk themselves into having more. So I mean, if you present like things that will improve people's builds to them one at a time, they'll tend to want to add them, and then pretty soon they're not using one button build anymore. So it changes.
Ooh.
Yeah, I my hope is that you won't want to be a one button build because you'll feel enticed by the cool things you could be doing. So that's my hope. But yeah, I'm sure that one button builds will be a thing.
And we have sort of, when looking at these builds and how they play together, said like, okay, the right combo here to do is like play it like a concerto piano where you've got 15 different keys you need to use in the right sequence of optimum damage. Like, that's not going to be fun.
Right.
It's going to be like using the skill when you see the situation has come up
Right.
to use the skill and thinking about when to use it.
The more interesting question to me is how good will the 0 button builds be? Like that's the question that I have. We still have to play around with that, I guess.
So I'm mostly pretty excited about the idea of these various situational skills and combos and things like that. But Path of Exile 1 has given us a very good example of ways in which it can become unfun, and that is totems on melee builds. It feeling like a mandatory and annoying thing to use for various reasons, like them dying and their placement and stuff like that, I think is an example of that kind of like bad comboing that makes it less fun but feels mandatory. Have you thought about that, discussed that, and how you might be avoiding that with PoE2's design?
Definitely avoiding stuff that is like, this is just a buff that you want to effectively keep up all the time, and sometimes it's annoying to keep up all the time, but it's just there all the time, is something we're trying to avoid as much as possible, especially because you can then weapon swap to like apply the buff and then go back. It becomes a chore. Much more a focus on the combo skills being like, and now they're open, so I'm going to do a 10 times damage freezing spell on them that will just nuke them.
Melee totems, because melee's not really that great in PoE1. And so it's kind of like melee totems are part of the kind of like attempt to make that better, like at some point in the past. And so like I certainly will want PoE2 to have melee totems as well, but the way they work, I mean what makes them so annoying, right? Like what is it really at the core
That's
of what
the question,
makes them
right?
annoying?
Like,
I think this is the
what's your take on that?
The main thing that it's got a huge damage buff, right? And you
Yep.
might as well have that
mandatory.
huge damage buff,
that is
which is
definitely
almost certainly gone.
That will definitely need to go, right? There should be no reason why that should give you a damage buff like that. In fact, why was that even done in the first place?
I feel like them doing damage should be the damage buff, right? Like,
Yeah, of course, right? Well, yeah, why not? Why wouldn't it be, right? Obviously. So why was that damage buff even added? Why is that?
It's probably just because everything we gave Melee was some sort of buff to their thing if it wasn't.
But it was just kind of like an awkward ancient band-aid, I guess, at this
I
point.
don't remember why that would have even been added.
Might have just been to make them different from other totems. Just wasn't done the right way.
So,
Yeah.
but did they have that when they were added?
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez.
The buff has been buffed at various
Great.
points.
The thing is, I feel I feel like maybe I'll even suggest this to Mark, but it's like we probably should just remove that and like make them better,
I
right?
think we already have in the plans.
Oh,
for
and
those
yeah, sure.
skills.
But what I meant wasn't even in PoE1. Maybe I don't know. Like either way though, like that's not up to me. That's a Mark question. But
I think that's
but go on.
I think that's not why they're like considered bad though. That's the
no, I agree.
aggravating
The other
factor.
element is having to recast them all the time, right? That's your concern.
For sure.
Which, I mean, it'll be an optional playstyle if you want to invest in melee totems and focus on that stuff.
Yeah.
And probably also you're investing in stuff that makes it far more convenient to keep them up.
Then the question is, why is it not unfun to recast your spell totems?
Why is it? Wait, what?
Because the spell totems are doing your damage. Like they're the main thing you want to do.
As opposed to the melee totems,
As
which are
opposed
doing
to
the damage.
spell
Right. So what you're saying is that it might be fine to recast the spell the melee totems if they were actually doing damage to the monsters as opposed to buffing
if you're
you.
doing a totem
As
build.
opposed, right. So no, it really comes always back to the fact that they give you a damage boost, which makes them mandatory and makes it feel frustrating because you need to keep the damage boost up and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it all stems from that decision, I think. So I suspect. Like, well, I have to admit, we haven't like prototyped melee totems in PoE2 again yet. Like, that's not a thing we've yet done. So therefore, we haven't kind of then meant. What that means is that we haven't like, unless you am I wrong about that, Rory? Did we do it already?
It's technically functional, but we haven't played with it.
Well, sure. We haven't like had a whole like thing where we like, okay, let's get this in the right place kind of moment. You know, like yet, if you know what I mean. So what that means is that like it's hard to then answer the specifics, but I absolutely believe that yeah, it's going to be that damage bonus that's the primary part of why they suck. So that can be improved in that way.
I think like even zooming out a little bit, it kind of extends to other things that are like a mandatory damage buff that have an inconsistent uptime. Because that's they're dying randomly to you as the player, and that's similar to like with a totem.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Oh, that's really good to hear. Looking forward to seeing how you address that in the future.
How do you feel about item pickup radius heading into PoE2? Would it be possible for PC players to get a pick up nearby items button like on console, considering we're now getting WASD movement?
So we just had an argument about this right before the podcast, and
friendly argument.
Friendly argument. Yeah. I am of the opinion that we will need to increase pickup radius. Ooh. There is an argument for how much buy. There's an argument by how much buy. One issue, of course.
10 years.
One issue, of course, is how do you indicate to the player that so with WSD, you don't want to have when you click on an item, you don't want your character to move to the item, right? You want it to stay still because obviously you're moving with WSD. So therefore, there has to be some kind of indication on the hover about whether or not you're in range to pick it up. And so one way to solve that is just to make the pickup radius the whole screen. But I kind of feel a bit sad about that for various reasons, which is why I kind of don't. I'm not really that keen. So we'll have to find a solution to that. It's actually not something we've solved yet. It's something we have to do something about it. And that would of course also mean that various other factors relating to item pickups would hopefully get less annoying. And I mean, look, it's going to at least be large enough that like you'll be able to not stand in the ground fire when you will go to pick up your item. And that kind of thing. So it'll at least be large enough for that. But we still have to just make sure that we get that feeling kind of okay and working out. I mean, the thing that came up as we were discussing this was like just related to the whole you should never move when you're not pressing WSD if you're in that mode. Is like, okay, so what happens if there's a lever and you need to, there has to be some amount of your character moves a little bit because you can't, you're not going to stand in the exact pixel that's the exact point where you need to do the lever, right? So there has to be a little bit of that, but we have to work that out.
Can you psychically open doors?
Yes. Well, then there's the next thing. Yes. Can you psychically open doors? I mean, obviously the increase. I would actually think we should increase the radius of that even a little bit as well. Nice. Because I think like not so much that it would feel like you're not walking up to the door to open it, but like at least enough so that it doesn't feel totally fiddly to be able to do that stuff. So yeah, there's things we'll have to do there, but yes, I do think that radius will have to increase a bit.
That sounds so good. And since you're kind of on this topic, how about when we talk to NPCs when we're like got a menu up and we're getting attacked and there's ground effects underneath them burning us while we're trying to shop in their in-game vendors and
we haven't made this change yet, but I am actually very keen to make it so that you don't have to be right next to an NPC to talk to them, like have the radius of that be increased as well. But there's a few other issues around that I need to talk to our UX guy around because I think we can improve it, the way that feels. So yeah, stuff to do there. Yeah.
All right, good. Glad you're
So,
looking into that.
just to be clear, so the argument was about the amount of range increase on the pickup radius, not whether or not it's a good idea to even
Yeah, it
have
will
that
increase.
in the
It
first
will
place.
increase. The question is how much.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a...
Yeah.
Okay, what about a telekinesis button then, like in Diablo 2? You're just opening doors and picking stuff up, but you have to, click a button. Maybe it takes a long time.
Don't have it. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That was too hopeful.
Something I never
That's all
expected
good.
to see was the ability to pause the game in single player, and as someone who recently became a father, I'm super excited about that, and very interested in some of the specifics. So you were talking... Go
pause
ahead.
is absolutely one of those things where, like, I think exactly one of those things where it's like,
Yeah.
it seems impossible for reasons that aren't exactly real. It's just like, well, we're a multiplayer game. We kind of pausing, and it's like when you really like, if you come into that with the question of, well, what if we just stopped making excuses? Like, what if we actually just didn't have that excuse and then we actually took it seriously? And it's like, well, yeah, I guess we could do it. And then at that
Love
point,
it.
it's like, well, yeah, I guess, like, yeah, I guess we can do it. You know what I mean? Like that it is just really that, I guess.
I need to ask myself that sometimes. What if I just stop making excuses?
Exactly. Yep.
So some of the specifics on that I'm pretty interested in, and I saw a question in chat just now actually. So could you have something like pause on disconnect, or is there a reason that's not a good idea?
Well, the instance does pause on disconnect if you're in single player.
But you're like
Whoa.
not dying after you disconnect, or is that just in that time lag there? Is it?
Well, hang on.
After
Hang on.
6
Just
seconds,
to
it
be clear,
activates?
though.
Hold on.
Right. Okay. So just okay.
You guys don't know that?
When I say disconnect, what I mean is when the server determines you have disconnected.
Yeah.
Right.
there's a lag
Because
there.
like we don't know you're disconnected until that happens, right? So the
Yeah.
question is like, it is impossible to understand, like, is this lag or is this a disconnect?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's the thing. So this is an interesting question, not one that I have considered before, but like, no. Okay, so here's the thing, right? You can always simulate lag on the client. So therefore, we have to very carefully think, what could a cheat possibly do
Lag switch.
if they have the ability, so I just have to think about that. But I guess since the client can pause the game anyway, why couldn't we?
Oh.
Yeah, why couldn't you?
If the client hasn't sent a packet to the server for some very short amount of time, pause the instance in single player.
Oh.
Hold up.
Is there a reason we couldn't do that? Let me just think
Let him
about
cook.
this. Let me just think about this. So, what could a cheat? Because you can pause the game anyway. So, if the client is capable of pausing the game at any time, then I don't see a reason why we couldn't pause the server if you're lagging. I don't see a reason why we couldn't do that in single player.
I mean, you can pause at any time by hitting the escape key.
Yes, that's what I mean.
So
You can
there's
do
no
that. So there
advantage
really is
to
no
it.
reason why we couldn't do that.
Oh, the
I think-
follow-on
I remember that was like a giant point of contention because obviously a lot of hardcore players are listening
for
to
sure,
this
for sure.
and literally,
For sure.
yeah,
That would actually be a fix to the hardcore lag death problem.
Yes.
Wow.
yeah. Because
I
I
will-
remember when Shaper
yeah,
used
yeah.
to pause the entire game, a lot of people brought that up, and there were some interviews with Chris where it was a little bit unclear because it did seem like you guys were able to slow down the game or stop it altogether pretty much immediately when that was recognized, but then it was never and people used that as an argument for the 6-second timer, and what I'm hearing right now is really good. I really like
I
it.
know. Well, in multiplayer, it has to be that way. We can't pause the instance in multiplayer, of course, right?
Right.
And we still can't tell the
yeah.
difference between lag and not, and like getting disconnected is no fun when you just have a 1 second lag spike when you don't even know that you normally had it. Like, this kind of thing sucks, right? There's a reason why you want to have the timer be some amount more than instant, But yes, we could in single player because if you're not getting disconnected, it's not really as much of an issue. So yeah, there is actually a world where we could pause the instance in single player. Yep. No. Okay. Well, I will look into that. That could be a thing.
Obviously, like, temper expectations a bit because, like, I imagine you have to explore the nuances.
Yeah.
of this, and
Yeah.
whether there's any
But
technical
I don't
limitations.
immediately see a reason.
Opium overload.
I do not immediately see a reason why we couldn't do that. So I'll talk to Reese, who would probably be the best person to talk to about this.
Rampant hype.
And
Let's go.
like, see if there's any reason why we can't just implement that.
Well,
Sure,
hot damn, I'm
why
glad
not?
I asked this question.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
Whoa.
For sure. It honestly had not been I had not connected pausing and hardcore death as like lag spikes as a thing yet in my mind. So that connection was very good of you to point out.
And
some
the
people are
person- the
pointing
random
out
person
to
in chat
the
too.
Yeah, for sure.
6-second timer as an impossible to fix issue. It seems
Yeah, another
like,
one.
but
There you go.
apparently,
Taking them out.
maybe.
Sure.
So I still have some other questions about the pause thing. You mentioned in
Yeah.
like one of the previous interviews the idea of
Yeah.
like being able to look at debuffs and things like that
Yes,
that's
yes.
on your character and
Yeah.
how that's difficult to do in current PoE. Can you do that while paused?
Yes.
Yes, you can. So you'll
Amazing.
be able to mouse over.
You'll be
I
able to
can
look
pause
at
in
your
the boss fight and look at the
character sheet and-
mechanics.
Yeah, look at your
Mm.
skills and see what your skill is currently, what its current DPS is in that exact frame. You
Ah,
And
that's
definitely
things like
won't.
that.
so good for testing.
Yeah,
Yeah, you won't be able to change your gear and passives out
Yep.
mid
Fair.
battle.
Yeah.
that
yeah,
would
but
be
you can
pretty
inspect-
degenerate.
But the intention is that you can inspect your character and various things that you want to do.
Yeah, so
while
you can open
paused,
up your
which is-
character screen and
Oh.
handy.
things like that and skill
Yeah.
info. Okay, great. So what happens if you get like a trade message or something like that? Can you like chat with other people while paused?
You can chat while paused, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like queue up a trade, like pause and discuss a trade because that's like a new
yeah,
thing to
yeah,
trade
sure.
right
Why
now.
not? No reason
Yeah.
why not. Yeah, like
Sick.
all non-combat and like all non-game simulation packets. Well, to be technical about it, still work while paused. So there is no reason you can't do any of the things that are outside the like game simulation
Nice.
while you're
That's
paused.
amazing
Like
trade
accepting
quality of
parties
life.
and all of those other
Yeah.
and all those
Yeah.
other things like
Because
that.
right now, like being in the middle of a boss fight or something,
Okay.
you're like trying to type to someone, like,
Yeah,
give me
yeah,
that, I'm in
yeah,
a boss
for sure,
fight, and you
for
like
sure,
send it to the wrong person.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Press escape and take our time.
Yeah, you'll still have to like open the portal to get out of the boss fight. So if you
Sure,
like,
yeah, that's fine.
die when trying to open the portal and fail to make that trade, that's on you. But
So
Awesome.
is pausing restricted to? Because you said that obviously you can't do it in like group play, but if the players are in the same party but they're not in the same instance, can you still use the pause?
Yeah, of course.
And then what happens if somebody? You could.
Yeah.
So then
if
what
someone-
happens if the game
actually,
is paused?
Now, what happens when someone joins the area while you're paused?
I think
Exactly.
the
The area
Um,
unresumed. And this is important to know because if you're in a party, you are in danger of someone unpausing you. So you just have to be
Yes.
aware
Yeah.
of that, right? Like you have to be aware of that.
Okay, so that's
Those
just
are
something
things to know.
that's gonna work like that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. In fact,
wow.
I believe we even discussed this, although I don't believe I told any of the UI guys to actually do it. But I remember at the time we discussed putting a warning on the screen when you're paused in party that says,
Right.
warning, you could be unpaused by another player, just so you
Mm.
know that, like,
Wow.
you know,
Okay.
yeah, I think
PK
one of you guys
time, yeah.
actually had that. I remember when we were
That's
discussing
brutal.
pause originally, that did come up as a thing that we had to make sure was on the screen, just so you know, like, you know, you're in danger of someone else. Because the other thing as well, by the way, maybe something I don't know if we even mentioned before is you can pause in party play if everyone pauses. Like if everyone pushes escape, it pauses.
Oh.
Oh,
So you actually can. But the thing is, that's the other case where it would be a warning on the screen if you could be unpaused at any time because another
Yeah.
party.
Anyone
You
that
could do
pauses, it pauses for
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah. But you actually can pause in party play if that's the case also.
Oh, great.
Does it like
Oh, very
prompt
useful.
a pause vote or?
It's not
Oh,
a
you just
vote.
pause.
It's that once everyone is paused, the game is paused.
Yeah, so there'll be like a thing that says
Oh,
so and so
okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like that,
paused
okay.
or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah, so if everyone does that, it just
yeah. That's what boys comes
Oh,
for,
and,
right?
and,
Oh,
and
okay.
game auto pauses when you like do things that cover the whole screen, like open the passive screen and things like that. Will auto vote for pause, if you will. I mean, like you are considered to be I want to pause when those screens are open. And so then if everyone is looking at passives, then yes, the game will be paused.
Cool.
Or pushing escape or whatever.
Wow.
It is. So
Oh, that's so good for like co-op play with like a new player or something. Oh,
yeah.
awesome.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if you're like, I want to go to the bathroom, you can.
I'm so
you know,
amped.
as long as you trust
What
your
the-
friend, as
Yeah,
long as you
Oh
trust
my
your
God.
friend, then you can go do that when you're in party
It's
play.
amazing. Okay, so just to
Yeah,
follow up on that, do you have any? So you don't need to spot, but I'm more thinking about ambition. So in PoE 1, I remember how you were talking about Act 10. We're gonna keep going for 10 years. What are your current like thoughts of
Oh,
PoE's
aspirations.
future?
I see no reason it wouldn't last as long as PoE 1 has until now, at least, right? Like, why not?
Another 10
Mhm.
kind let's go.
Yeah, let's absolutely, right? Why not?
Hell yeah. Amazing.
Of course, like we're a long-term game. Kind of the thing, right?
Rise?
All right, I'm asking the artsy question
Do it.
now. This one's going to be tough. We understand that most microtransactions from PoE 1 will be transferable to PoE 2. You guys have talked about that quite a lot. A lot of people's concerns is how this impacts the game's immersion and aesthetic, particularly in towns and in the general interaction with other players. How do you think these elements from the first game will blend with the new world and atmosphere of PoE2 without disrupting its unique feel and design?
Well, it's kind of just unfortunately the case that it will affect it, right? Like, I mean, there's not a lot we can do about that. I think that the decision to make the monetization the same across both games was much more of an important and like player positive thing to do than the downside of that. And ultimately, you know, like microtransactions being what we sell, like, you know, like people wanting shiny, flashy things, like that's going to be how it is. And I think that over time, like obviously we've got older stuff that doesn't look as good, but people tend to wear newer stuff anyway. So I don't think it'll be like, I don't think like old stuff looking bad will be a that common occurrence for the most part. But yeah, obviously it can happen. I actually, a couple of days ago, was looking at some PoE1 microtransactions, what they look like in PoE2, because it's kind of interesting. It's like, you know, you look at them and you're kind of like, okay, well, yeah, like this thing on the screen looks worse than the other stuff on the screen for sure, right? But I mean, it is what it is. Like, it's.
I mean,
that's what it looks like. What looked like when you bought it.
Yeah.
You know, like that's kind of the reality of that.
It's still got like nicer lighting and stuff on
I mean,
it, but you can only do so much.
I mean, it's sort of interesting though, because there's nicer lighting in the area, but it's still in like it depends on what era it's from. Because if it's from before the PBR. This is physically based rendering era, then some of the stuff the lighting can look a bit funky on. Like, I mean, it still works, but it's like it certainly doesn't look as nice as what the new stuff looks like. But for anything that's like, what was it, about 5 years ago maybe when we started PBR, or maybe 4, like I can't remember, but anything post that era looks a lot nicer in the lighting of PoE2 for sure, just because it's using the new lighting stuff that we did.
Damn.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we've got some micros that, you know, we sold in, you know, 2012. It's like 2011 even, I guess. Those things don't look as good as modern stuff for sure.
Where possible, will stash tabs also carry over to PoE2?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I imagine some of them might not, like if the thing doesn't exist in PoE2.
I mean, I don't know if there's anything that like there's a stash tab. I mean, they might have to change a bit, but like I don't think there's anything as a stash tab for that's going to be like straight up removed.
Well, you were undecided on divination cards last I heard, right?
Well, oh sure, okay, yeah. There's that, I guess. Yeah, but I mean, like, sure, like there might be a few things like that, and
essences maybe. I could see them.
Well,
not being
I mean,
PoE2.
I'm sure we will have those eventually.
Okay.
So it might be that the stash tab is not there when you first come in, but then when they get added, then they come in.
Oh,
You know,
that's
that
cool.
kind of thing could happen. But yeah.
I got to applaud that carrying over. That's awesome.
Right.
Fantastic. Can we expect to see you guys somewhere else soon, or is there some upcoming reveals that people can look forward to?
So we'll have another reveal not too far away. I'm not going to give you the exact date yet. And we also are just doing more like community podcasts and things like that. You know,
Right.
so we'll be doing one of those every few weeks or so. Yeah, like you know, and it's been a little while since I posted on Reddit because I've been a little bit busy, but I do plan to continue posting on there and doing more stuff. So you know,
That's awesome.
talkative try some more content to make a video about, I guess.
This has been an amazing Q&A. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate
But
it.
yeah, so I just want to make sure that we're engaging with the community as much as we can. Yeah, that's the idea.
It feels like back in the beta days of PoE1.
Well, it should do. Because
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like, you know, like I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, well, what did we do back then that made us successful? I'm thinking like, okay,
Yeah.
let's make sure we're doing all that stuff again. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I don't want to leave anything off the table there.
Amazing. Thank you both very much, and thank you everyone for watching and for your questions.
Yeah,
See you fine
thank
folks
you.
later. Bye bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, guys.